down.
I'm telling you, man. They be woofing them churros.
None of those. Hey, but none of those 5 ladies were big that he interviewed.
No, that's why it took her all day. Come on.
Could I see
it? Took her all day.
It took me a wrong way to get
It
there.
took her all day to find 5 skinny women down there.
Do me one more favor. Just let me see the churro eating again one time.
Like my man, like Joey, you know how my man be eating the hot dog, Joey Chestnut? That's why them big old women be eating those churros.
Double fist.
Oh, they be double fish, no churros, man.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another edition of the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Michael Wein, coming to you live from Houston, Texas, Sunday, May 5th, the day after Star Wars Day. Hopefully, May the 4th was with you yesterday. 9:30 p.m. local time here in Houston, Texas. A rainy Houston, Texas at that. And we've got a loaded NBA playoff show for you guys tonight. And to do it all with me, my fantastic co-host, a man of many talents, one of which is being a NBA guru, a fanatic of the NBA playoffs, just like myself. Mr. Emmy Nixon, what's up?
Nothing much, man. I've been enjoying this NBA basketball, man. I had such a good time watching that Nuggets Timberwolves game from last night. We'll get into that a little bit later, but oh my, that is going to be an incredible series. And I'm an absolute basketball sicko, so when I see two juggernaut teams like that face off, it's like heaven for me.
So the way this episode is going to work, first we're going to react to Game 7 of the Orlando Magic and the Cleveland Cavaliers, a game in which the Cleveland Cavaliers emerged victorious and advanced to the next round to face the Boston Celtics. We'll do takeaways from both sides. Then we'll get into yesterday's Game 1 between the Minnesota Timberwolves and Denver Nuggets. As Emmy mentioned, that's going to be potentially the best series of the entire playoffs. And then we'll get into some round 2 previews for Cavs Celtics, Mavs Thunder, and Pacers Knicks. And then through the second half of the show, we'll be talking about some of the big name eliminated teams, the Bucks, both Los Angeles teams. And there's a couple others we'll mix in there. But it's going to be a loaded show. So if you're tuning in live, make sure you leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and check out all of our other content on this channel, including Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. And I got to tell you, before we jump right in, we've been getting some good feedback on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. It seems like we're keeping those videos, those podcasts are getting consistently an amount of views in which I'm satisfied with for the amount of effort that goes into it. So we'll continue to put out good content. Next week, there will probably be a lot of backloaded content that we'll be releasing gradually throughout the week. But this week, we've got lots more to come. So with all that being said, let's jump right into this basketball discussion. Let's start by reacting to and giving our takeaways from the Cleveland Cavaliers defeating the Orlando Magic earlier this afternoon, 106-94, propelled by a huge second half to win that series in 7 games. Emmy Nixon, your initial reaction and takeaways.
Well, the first thing to say is that Donovan Mitchell simply was not going to let the Cavs lose. He had that look in his eye tonight. He had that look in his eye in Game 6. But them being at home this time around, knowing what had happened last year with that loss in 5 games to the Knicks, he, I think, came out in that second half with, just the right mindset, just to be aggressive and attack, relentless. Now, you can say what you want about Donovan Mitchell, like in terms of like his completeness as an offensive player, in terms of like his playmaking for others, but when it comes to scoring, it's going to be hard to find someone with less shots in their repertoire, it's going to be hard to find someone with more shots in their repertoire than Donovan Mitchell, to put it that way. And I was extremely impressed with his performance. I thought he really stepped up to the challenge, even when at certain points his teammates weren't coming along for the ride. And then they were able to get that 8-point lead to close the third quarter. And then from there, they just got the stops they needed to hold them off.
Yes. First of all, Donovan Mitchell continues to be a terrific NBA playoff performer. He was great in the second half. He started out slow, and that's why the Cavs largely fell behind by as many as like 18 points in the first quarter and a half. We'll talk about how they got back into it, but in the second half, you're right. He was not going to let the Cavs lose this series. He scored 50 points in a loss in game 6, but still scored 50, and then came back today, put up, I believe, 39, 24 of which were in the second half. We saw Paolo Banchero have a big first half. Donovan Mitchell responds with a big second half, and he did it efficiently. Shot 57% from the field in the second half. That's number one. Number two, I thought two players really kind of changed the momentum of this game and flipped the switch in terms of the intensity, especially on the defensive end of the floor. I thought Evan Mobley's presence down low on the defensive glass with 5 defensive rebounds this afternoon, along with his disruption against some of the shots down low by Franz Wagner later on in the game. Even though they weren't necessarily blocks, he was altering a lot of those shots, making them difficult. Because in the first half, the Magic were getting to the rim. I mean, Paolo was getting to the rim, getting good shots. I thought they did a good job of penetrating and kicking out for threes.
Yep. Getting to the line.
Getting to the line, exactly. But I thought Evan Mobley's presence, even though he wasn't much of a factor offensively in this game, that was important. And then I thought Isaac Okoro, even more so, was fantastic with what he was able to do against Paolo Banchero on ball and disrupting his rhythm some in the second half. We saw Paolo Banchero take some tough, like fadeaway 12-footers, 15-footers, and I thought his energy on the defensive end was really key in flipping this game. And then finally, from Orlando's perspective, it was kind of just a nightmare second half performance. As Jason Timpf mentioned on his show earlier today in his recap, this series, especially later on in the series, just kind of exposed Orlando's desperate need for three-point shooting, some perimeter shot making. Banchero's fantastic. I think he can be a 27, 28 point per game playoff guy on good efficiency. And, as players mature, as they get older, they start to eliminate the fat and they get better at replicating what works best. I think they've got a very bright future. It was a very successful season. You won 47 games, made the playoffs, pushed the Cavs to the brink. But they just went cold in the second half, and the Cavs defensively were almost baiting them to shoot those threes.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't make them. They need some more shot making from the perimeter. But very successful season on Orlando's side. We'll talk about them more in the offseason. They're a very interesting team. They're the 4th youngest team in the NBA, but they do have some free agents that make things interesting, and they have good amount of cap space. The thing is you're going to have to pay Banchero sooner rather than later. You're going to have to probably invest some in Jalen Suggs. So we'll talk about their situation, and if you want to chime in more, you can. Yeah. But overall, Cleveland did a good job once they fell behind in the first quarter due to a slow start offensively, of flipping the game with some of the things they did on defense, and Donovan Mitchell just being the better player, best player on the floor overall.
Right, right. I'll close this. I'll close it with this on the Magic. I think they're such an interesting team this offseason because they're the classic young team where the front office has to decide whether to be aggressive or to continue to build from within. They have some guys that are injured at the moment. They have a rookie in Jet Howard, who I think can be a shooter for them moving forward, possibly in a bigger role once he's, inserted into the rotation. Guys like Chuma Okeke have been injured for a lot of this season as well. So their big decision is, do we, go out and make a really aggressive move for a third star to surround Franz and Paolo? Or do we just kind of look into more complementary pieces? Role players that can shoot, defend, be connective pieces, kind of like what we talked about on Dit Hole yesterday as well. And for me, honestly, I would rather see them go for the second round, get some role players, and have Franz and Paolo continue to grow. Because the last thing you want is to bring in, just for the sake of a name, say a Kevin Durant, and have him step on the toes of these young players, kind of like how Kyrie did on the Celtics on kind of all those years back. So,
yeah, it's interesting which direction they'll go because they have 11 players under contract for next year, none of which are making more than $17 million, and they've got 5 first-round picks that they can use in trades, but they also have a significant amount of cap space to go out and add free agents, and they could go add, a couple shooters, complementary pieces as you're talking about, without necessarily hindering the ability to go out and make a bigger move down the road. But I think generally I agree that you should probably take some gradual baby steps rather than trying to go for it all, pushing all the chips right now. I don't know if that makes sense with the timeline of their team, but at the same time, a Paul George will most likely be available. Do they go after him aggressively? We'll just have to see. It'll be interesting. But let's move on to round 2. Is there anything else from round 1 overall that we need to address really fast?
Well, I think we'll cover it in the Fallout segment later. So I'll just leave it with this.
Fair enough. Yesterday, Timberwolves Nuggets. First game of round 2 in a series that should be the best series of the playoffs. I'm just going to go ahead and make that a prediction right now. What'd you see in game 1? Why were the Timberwolves able to go out and beat the Denver Nuggets on their home floor in game 1?
Yeah, we got to remember just how difficult it is to win in Denver. To preface this amazing win the Timberwolves had, the Nuggets, I think, lost 4 games at home in total all season, if I'm not mistaken. So it was something like that. And they went in there, and in that first quarter, they sent a message. I know that Denver kind of had their run and brought the game back in. It was a close game after that, but that message that was sent in that first quarter, I think, really set a tone. And I think it mattered, especially with how Anthony Edwards was put onto Jamal Murray to start the game. I think, I would kind of compare it to, I know it's not the exact same thing, but back in 2011 in the Eastern Conference Finals, LeBron didn't guard Derrick Rose, but in high leverage situations, fourth quarter situations, they would put LeBron on Derrick Rose. So I think that move by Finch and that staff to put Edwards on Murray to start the game was just a message of hey, we got a guy that can stuff you out of everything you want to do. Just so you know. But we're going to put McDaniels on you, and he'll do just as good a job. Um, it's ridiculous the amount of defense this Timberwolves team has, and it's really just going to depend on them being efficient on offense like they were last night. Karl-Anthony Towns had an amazing game, especially in that third quarter. I think gave them a big lift. Him not being in foul trouble has to be a big priority. He picked up 5, of course, in the totality of the game, but it never really felt like they had to, take him out like early in the first quarter like we've seen with him so many times. He was still able to make an impact on the game. I just think this Timberwolves team, they provide such a huge challenge for Joker. And the Inside the NBA crew kind of talked about this. The Nuggets will have to play some of either DeAndre Jordan or Zeke Naji, because if they don't, they just won't have the size in those non-Jokic minutes to contend with this team on the boards.
Yeah, good stuff there by you. You hit on pretty much everything I wanted to, but let me just add on a little bit from what I saw. First of all, Anthony Edwards is elevating himself to another stratosphere right now.
Yeah.
43 points in that game, but just what he did in the fourth quarter was like the next step for him. Because I saw a stat. He really struggled in the regular season meetings against Denver in the fourth quarter. I don't remember the exact numbers, but yesterday he was, I think, 4 or 5 from the field, made some big time shots, including that little fadeaway over, I think it was his right shoulder or left shoulder on the right block. Forget who it was against, but that was nasty. He's just been incredible. And when I look at Denver, I have some questions about, what's going to be their answer for Edwards, because I feel like he's got this unique combination of, like, he's too physical and strong for some smaller defenders like KCP, but at the same time, he's so fast twitch that he could be too quick and too explosive for a guy like Michael Porter Jr. It's just going to be tough. Like, what are they going to throw at him next? But even with that, like, he's going to have to do this again and again. So we'll see what they do there. But I think the more interesting conversation comes with Jamal Murray. We talked about some of his first half struggles against the Lakers in that series, but he was able to, come alive more in the second half and basically win them 2 of those games.
Yeah.
We know he's able to flip a switch.
Yep.
But I feel like with him dealing with that calf strain, and the good news is the Nuggets get 3 days off in total between tomorrow's game 2 and game 3 when they have to travel to Minnesota. But with him not, I think, being 100% healthy, and with the Timberwolves' ability to throw not only Anthony Edwards onto him, but also Jaden McDaniels onto him for stretches, and
even Alexander Walker.
Exactly. Like, all the guys that they can throw at him offensively when he's not fully healthy and he's struggling to find it a little bit offensively. At the same time, with him, Jamal Murray, having to expend at least a minimum amount of energy on the other end of the floor to chase around Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker off those ball screens. Like, it's just like, I have some questions there. Like, we'll see what happens with that. But the big thing yesterday was Anthony Edwards and then what Naz Reid did in the fourth quarter, the 6th man of the year in the NBA, what he did in the fourth quarter when I believe it was Karl-Anthony Towns was dealing with some foul trouble, scoring 14 points in that quarter. He made layups. He made a big 3, although he banked it in. But hey, if it goes in, it really doesn't matter. He had a couple put back dunks, which was big. Like his energy on both ends was fantastic for the Timberwolves in that game. And you're right. I mean, they're going to have to go to Zeke Naji or DeAndre Jordan, or they're just not going to have enough size and physicality to match the Timberwolves on both ends in this series. I think regardless, though, the Nuggets will adjust. I expect them to win game 2. But the T-Wolves have already done a number here by getting game 1, and they'll go back to Minnesota at the very least tied up with the defending champs in this series. And they have some real advantages over Denver right now. Just taking that first game, their size, their physicality, I won't say injury, but Jamal Murray not looking 100%, how Anthony Edwards is playing right now. It'll just be a matter of whether or not they can replicate that half-court offense a couple more times in this series. Because I feel like if they go back to Minnesota and they're able to do it, they go up 3-1, might be wraps. And I never thought I'd say that. But is there anything else that we need to throw into this conversation before?
Well, I think the key to this series for Denver is it has to be defense. Peyton Watson being unplayable in this series really hurts. Like the minutes that he was in there, he really struggled to shoot the ball. Like Minnesota was just ignoring him, and he had that really rough air ball as well from the right wing. He provided really good minutes from them in the regular season. Like he provided such good energy and he was a wrecking ball defensively. He was, protecting the rim at certain stages. Like he was guarding the other team's best perimeter player a lot of the year in those non-KCP minutes. So him being unplayable with his shooting confidence kind of wavering, that's really tough for Denver. But what I originally wanted to say, is Michael Porter Jr. has to have a big series. We've talked about him as their third guy, but I think this has to be the series where he steps it up a level and averages, say 25 or 26. Like this has to be the series because you look at his matchup, McDaniels, I don't think with all the length McDaniels has, that is still a tough closeout when you're closing out to a 6'10" guy who elevates to above 7 foot when he's shooting his jump shot. That's a shot MPJ can make and he has to make if the Nuggets are going to win this series.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's go into some shorter series previews for the other 3 second-round series before we get to the back end of the show where we'll do our Fallout season segment for 4 or 5 teams. Let's start with the Cleveland Cavaliers Boston Celtics series. We'll go back to talking about Cleveland as they advanced earlier today against the Orlando Magic in 7 games. I don't know exactly when this series will begin. I assume it'll be Tuesday or Wednesday based on the fact that they played today. Definitely won't be tomorrow.
Yeah.
What are you looking for in this series? Do the Cavs stand a chance? It's probably a rhetorical question.
No. I think, I think Donovan Mitchell, he's gonna get his. He's a great enough player that regardless of who you throw at him, whether it be Derek White, whether it be Drew Holiday, whether it be Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, he's going to get his. But I just named 4 names that are, perennially considered all defense level players. This is a really tall task. And I just don't think the Cavaliers have the offense around him right now to supplement it. Now, one thing that could play in their favor is getting Jared Allen back. And the fact that Porzingis doesn't look like he's going to play much this series, that is something in their favor. But for them to get a couple games in their series, they're going to really have to attack the offensive glass, because I don't see them being efficient enough in the half court, going one and done each possession. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I think they're going to have to really attack the offensive glass. And the tough part about that is, if you don't get the offensive rebound and you're attacking the glass, then the Celtics get out and run, and then you get in trouble as well. So they're in a bind. Their offense is going to have to just be worlds better than what it was in that Orlando series. And I think that's going to be a real struggle to find that.
Yeah. I'll add a couple more things and we'll move on. Cleveland doesn't stand a chance in this series. Maybe they'll get a game if Donovan Mitchell can do like one of those 40 or 50-point nights, maybe back in Cleveland, and they have a hot shooting night like Miami did in one game in the last series. But, even with Donovan Mitchell being as great as he was in the Orlando series against what was a very tough defense, and even with the fact that he's terrific in the playoffs and he actually has some really good numbers against Boston in his career so far. In fact, I think he averages more points against Boston than he does any other team in the NBA. He's scored 30 or more points in 23 of his 51 career playoff games already to this point in his career. Only one 30-point playoff game behind where Jason Tatum sits right now in his career. Like, he's fantastic, but he's got little to no help elsewhere on the offensive end of the floor. And even with his almost 29 points per game in the Orlando series, the Cavs scored just barely over a point per 100 possessions in the Orlando series. And Boston actually had the better regular season defense than Orlando did. And they've got more guys that they can throw at Donovan Mitchell on ball, with some of their wing defenders, Drew Holiday, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. I mean, you go down the list. They've got a ton of guys that can throw at him. So for them even to get a game in this series, they're going to need, in particular, Darius Garland to shoot the ball better than he did in the Orlando series and play better offensively. And then we saw Max Strus hit some big shots in the third quarter today in a little run where Cleveland really made their run and got back into the game. But we saw Sam Merrill make some shots throughout the series. Isaac Okoro really isn't too much of a factor on the offensive end. Neither is Mobley. They're going to need, it'd be nice if they could get Jared Allen back, and it'd be even nicer if they could get, a Dean Wade back, just for some more shot making.
They need that shooting right now.
They need the shooting. They're going to have some big performances from Max Strus, from a couple of these other guys, along with Darius Garland, to be competitive, because they just don't have the half-court offense, even without Porzingis. They just don't have enough. For Boston, you just have to make sure that you stay aggressive, you stay focused on the defensive end of the floor, and I think they could help themselves a little bit by turning defensive stops, which I think they'll get a lot of in this series, into transition offense, so that they don't have to rely as much on potentially their heavy volume 3-point shooting in the half court against a tough Cleveland defense the entire series. But even with that being said, you're missing Kristaps Porzingis. That's going to elevate Al Horford to the starting lineup. That's going to take away from some of your depth. But even with that, they still have the best bench in the playoffs. It's been even better than it was in the regular season so far, with guys like Sam Hauser coming in and knocking down shots. Derek White's had some big games, although, he's been mostly in the starting lineup. The Celtics are 22-4 without Porzingis this year, so it's not been too much of an issue, and they're 10-3 without Porzingis against playoff teams. So I just think they'll have too much. You're going from facing a team that really struggled to create half-court offense in the Orlando Magic to potentially the most skilled offensive team, even without Porzingis, in the entire playoffs, top to bottom. So I just don't think they'll have enough. Anything else, or let's move on?
I just want to say the other thing for Boston is you got to get Tatum going.
Yeah.
Like, for them to win a championship this year, he has to be their lead. He has to be the guy. And I know that's cliche, and I know they have a ton of weapons and all that, but if I'm Tatum, I look at this series and I'm like, this series is mine. But let's move on.
Okay, to the other series in the East for this conference semifinals in 2024, we've got the 6th seed Indiana Pacers, who defeated the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round, moving on to face the 2 seed New York Knicks, who beat the Philadelphia 76ers. So what are the things that you're looking for in this series, and who are you taking to win?
Well, I think it couldn't be two more opposite teams. The Knicks, they want to, just play in the mud, just grind out everything, rock fight, 90s, early 2000s style almost. And the Pacers, they run and gun. They want to get out and run and run their offense like with a lot of pace and urgency and kind of, I guess, work into their sets like almost like just quickly, like getting off shots with 50 on the shot clock. Like that's what they want. And it's a strange dynamic because with how these playoff games have been called this year, the pendulum has shifted towards physical basketball teams. And it's just hard for me to imagine, this Pacers team really getting down and dirty in the paint, going after rebounds, loose balls, and, meeting the challenge in terms of that physical battle. And that, to me, is where I see the difference. The rebounding battle, I think, is going to be an interesting thing to watch. The Pacers were bottom 10 in defensive rebounding this year. And although those are skewed because they didn't have Pascal Siakam for the entirety of the season, but that is something to watch. I think one thing that I think will be key as well is Miles Turner has to continue to shoot really well from three. He's shot 42% so far in the playoffs. And if he can continue to do that and pull Hartenstein and pull Mitchell Robinson outside of the paint and get them, up towards the three-point line defending in space, then you put the Knicks in a little bit of a bind because they want to play big. They want to, play those huge lineups and out-physical you. So I think overall, though, I lean Knicks because I really like the matchup of, putting OG on Pascal and kind of living with that. And I think that's a much better defender than anything the Bucks had to offer against Pascal. I think Pascal really cruised through that Bucks series because the Bucks just didn't have anybody for him. And then Tyrese, I think you could put any variety of, Hart, any number of those perimeter guys, McBride, any of those guys, I think could do a good job on Halliburton. So I lean Knicks in 6 games.
Yes. The biggest advantage the Knicks have, well, first of all, outside of Jalen Brunson being absolutely fantastic, getting to the line, scoring inside, making jumpers, just being the second team All-NBA guy that he has been this season, and been even better in the playoffs so far. How do the Knicks win offensively, especially missing Julius Randle? Well, they create second chance opportunities. They're not a one and done offensive team. They're aggressive. They attack the glass, and they win by volume of possessions. And so that's where they'll have supposedly the biggest advantage in the series is on the boards. That's what I view as kind of the big separator here for the Knicks. They led the NBA in offensive rebounding rate, and they still do, I believe. The Pacers, although the stats are skewed, they're not a great defensive rebounding team, even with Siakam. So I do think that will be a heavy lean towards New York, an advantage for them. And I just think that Jalen Brunson is and will be the best player in this series. Regular season stats don't matter as much when talking about the postseason, but against Indiana this year, he did average 36, got to the free throw line with relative ease, 10 free throw attempts per game, and he got 19.3 2-point field goal attempts per game. So I think with Tyrese and that back ailment that he has right now, not necessarily being fully healthy, and I think he's settling a little bit offensively. I just don't know with the guys that they're going to be able to throw at him. Anunoby, Josh Hart, Deuce McBride, you name it. It's going to be challenging for Indiana to create a ton of offense. And I think the Knicks will generate too many second chance opportunities on the offensive end of the floor. The advantage Indiana has, I think, is when they'll be able to kind of push the pace. You know, you mentioned that these two teams are two polar opposites. The Knicks were 30th in pace this year. The Pacers were, I think, first or second in pace this year. They're going to have to make this a run and gun kind of
track meet
style of game. And they're going to have to hope that they can get maybe Hartenstein or Anunoby, one of these guys in foul trouble, maybe a Mitchell Robinson.
Yeah.
Because then they might, be able to play into some bench advantages. We'll see. But I just think the Knicks will have too much physicality. Their defense will wear them down. And I think I agree. I'd probably take Knicks in 6 just because Indiana's been a good home team this year. And they seem to play a lot better there than they have on the road.
Yeah, I think I'll finish with a couple more things. Sorry. I just want to say I just think the Pacers have the ability to get hot from 3 in a way that the 76ers just simply could not do. And that's to me is why I would, give them a couple games in this type of series when I usually probably wouldn't give that benefit of the doubt. But the last thing I'll say is I think this series is fun just based off the history of these two teams alone. Like I think part of me, is imagining a scenario where Halliburton, hits a dagger in Madison Square Garden. He's like skipping back across the court. And all the Knicks fans are like, this fucking guy, like Knicks fans tend to like completely hate the guts of the opposing star by the end of a series. So I could definitely see that happening. Maybe like Tyrese bringing back the, Reggie, choke thing that he did to Spike Lee back in the day. But yeah, I'm excited to watch the series regardless of, how sure I am of the outcome.
Okay. We got to go somewhat quick.
Yeah.
But we need all of your thoughts on the Mavericks Thunder series. So go.
Okay. Maxey being healthy is really big. I think for the Mavericks, for them to win this series, I think they're going to have to lean a lot on the Kyrie, Luka, Derek Jones, PJ, Maxey lineup, which is, our quote unquote small ball. Because with that lineup, you're able to switch everything. You're able to put PJ on Jalen Williams, Derek Jones on Shea, and you can kind of feel comfortable with that. Whereas having a big on the floor, Derek Lively or Gafford, you would feel more confident in your ability to crash the offensive glass, which is one of the weaknesses of the Thunder. I just think the advantages of the small ball just outweigh that. Just because I think you'll be able to run your offense more effectively, and the more efficient on offense you can be, the better. Because we know the Thunder, they thrive on forcing turnovers, they thrive on getting out in transition, and you want to limit that as much as possible. You want to make the Thunder score on your half-court defense as much as possible. So I think that's the lineup the Mavericks have to lean on. And then the Thunder side of things, it's pretty simple. They just got to keep doing what they're doing. I actually think they're the deeper roster in these two matchups. It's just going to depend on, can their role players hit enough shots? Because we know the Mavs are going to have to give up something. And there's going to be certain guys that the Mavs aren't going to rotate to, and they're going to have their open looks. So I think this series is going to go all the way to 7 games. And I'm a homer, so I'm going to pick the Mavs in 7. But I'm also just not totally confident, just because I know how good Shea and Jalen Williams are.
Yeah. The Thunder's maturity already in the playoffs has really impressed me. Shea and Jalen Williams are on to another level right now. I cannot wait to watch Luka and Kyrie against those guys for 7 games. I think it is going to go 7 games. The Maxey factor is huge. You're absolutely right. I think that, first of all, I'm interested to see what does Luka look like after 3 days off, because he had something ailing him in that Clippers series that just didn't look totally right, although he still was good. And then Kyrie he's on another planet right now with some of the layup packages that he's putting on display. That of course we know he has in his bag, but he's pulling it all out right now.
Yeah.
That could have sounded wrong. And the shot that he made, the fadeaway, the dagger fadeaway on the right side of the court, the 3-and-1 that he made, that's just, my goodness, it's beautiful to watch. I do think I want to see who they put on Luka. They'll probably start out with maybe Dort on Luka, if I had to guess, as he's kind of an on-ball disruptor. They thrive on forcing turnovers, so if you're the Mavs, you want to prevent that. And then I want to see, how they're able to manipulate that pick and rolls with Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, those rim running bigs, and how they match up against Chet. Will Chet be able to minimize the impact of Gafford and Lively on the inside with his shot blocking ability? I do think this is going down to 7. To me, it basically comes down to which team's role players make more shots in the waning moments of these games. But it's going to be so fun to watch. It's going to be an appealing style of basketball to watch. I don't know. I don't know. I kind of err on the side of Dallas, especially if Kleba is healthy. But as we've seen already in these playoffs, having having home court advantage is a big
it matters.
factor. So we'll see what happens. We'll be talking about that series throughout the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I do want to say one thing to add on your point about Dort. I've been seeing Mavs fans, like, some of the discourse has been like, oh, Dort is too small for Luka. He's going to do Dort like he did Pat Bev. And I was just like, no. Like, Lou Dort is what Pat Bev thinks he is.
Mm-hmm.
Except he's Canadian, so he's not as talkative. So it's like he's an actual fire hydrant. Like, you're not moving him if you're posting up Lou Dort, you're not moving him.
Yeah.
So, Luka will be able to shoot over him, sure, but I do expect that to be a very a very tough matchup for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. We're on to the back end of the show with some Fallout season talk for here the next 30 or so minutes. Because I don't want to go all the way to an hour and a half, but we'll see where it takes us. Let's start with the team that the Mavs beat in the first round, and that is the Los Angeles Clippers. How do you just take us where you want to go with this?
Well, I think a fun way I thought to maybe frame this segment is just talk about who the guys that could be on the chopping block could be, and who should be on the chopping block, and who might the teams be a little reluctant to put on the chopping block, but probably should be. So for the Clippers, I think, right now you're in a tough spot because you're going to a new arena and you're selling these season tickets with the idea of having these 3 stars in-house on your team. So I think if you're the Clippers, I don't hate the idea of just, giving Paul George what he wants in terms of a contract. I think you match whatever offer other teams give him, like, which would definitely be the max. I think some teams giving him the max. And then James Harden, I think you give him a long-term deal, but maybe not, completely max money. I think James Harden probably cares more about the amount of years at this point, and he does seem like a good fit in LA as far as I can tell. So I'm cool with them running this team back. I'm not super optimistic that it'll just magically come together. But it is a bummer that just they haven't really had any shots at this thing with a fully healthy team, except for 2020.
Yes. The Clippers' 35-14 record prior to February 6th gave us a glimpse of what they could do when they were healthy, because they were 44-24 overall during the regular season when Harden, George, and Kawhi Leonard were on the court together. And obviously we know Kawhi missed a lot of round 1, and that's been an issue. The good thing for the Clippers is they've shown that they're comfortable being over the second apron with the extension that they gave to Kawhi. But as we know, Harden's an unrestricted free agent. George could become a free agent if an extension isn't worked out prior to June 30th. So we'll see where that goes. But, I think you make a good point about their new arena. If both players don't sign, the Clippers would open that arena with an often injured Kawhi Leonard and a collection of good role players, but nothing that would help them go achieve what they want to achieve at this point.
Especially not in the West.
Yeah, not in the West. No shot. So I think the priority this offseason should be try to re-sign both those guys and then go out and try to add depth at power forward, which I think they need, and some depth at center as well. They needed a floor spacer at one of those positions to try to limit some of the double teams that teams throw at Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. But when you look at the Paul George, James Harden situation, there are some questions that the Clippers are going to have to ask themselves. Number one, who are we bidding against? What are the teams that we are potentially bidding against for these players, especially Paul George? And then number two, is there a number that we get to in a potential bidding war with, say, the Philadelphia 76ers or the Orlando Magic, or maybe one of these other teams with cap space, that we walk away from, that we just don't go there? And then number three, who is the what are the real options to replace either player? Because they can't afford to lose both of them, as we already mentioned. They're both 34 years old, and so that's interesting. And another question is, like, does Leonard's 3-year, $150 million extension kind of set the bar for Paul George, who played his most games since 2018, 2019, 74 games. He shot a career high 41% from three. And he and Leonard were the only players to average 20 points and 1.5 steals and shoot 40% on three-pointers this year. But he is 34 years old. And like Leonard, prior to this year, has not been a very durable player. So that's a question, but they need to resign him. Yeah. And then Harden, it's interesting, but I feel like they probably should try to work something out with him too. And who will be his suitors if, he doesn't go to the Clippers? But they also have the ability to go extend, if they wanted to, potentially, Norman Powell's contract isn't up yet, but they could potentially work out an extension with him. He was really good this year in his role.
Yeah.
You look at a guy like Terrence Mann, who was also good for them. It's an interesting offseason for the Clippers, but the priority has to be sign Paul George, run it back with this team, and we'll see if it clicks or not.
I think at this point, Kawhi Leonard is a 50 games player. Like, take the fines, take whatever, you load manage him, and you just pray that you can get him through a playoff run, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that's best case scenario at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about their crosstown rival, the Los Angeles Lakers. They recently fired Darvin Ham, so we'll start there. Your reactions to them making that move to get rid of not only Darvin Ham, but I believe their entire staff, and then I guess take the conversation where you will from there.
Well, I think, to be fair, the move to fire him was probably the right move. It's always a weird dynamic when the Lakers fire a coach. I feel like it never ends smoothly. Like they this time they just waited for 4 days, and it was just kind of hanging there, and then they pulled the trigger. But yeah, I think there were certain adjustments that I think he could have made at certain points, but at the same time, best case scenario, you get a new coach, right? And say the new coach buys you an extra game against Denver. How are you splitting that gap? I think the tough decision they got to make is the one on D'Lo and Austin Reeves. That's going to be the tough part, because I've said this before on this podcast, and I'll say it again. I don't think those two can coexist in the backcourt. Now, I think D'Lo can be a fantastic sixth man. And at points this year, they played Reeves at sixth man, which I thought was a mistake. I thought Reeves is the better fit to be in the starting lineup next to LeBron. But nonetheless, I think they got to make a decision on their backcourt. I think Rui fits decently well alongside LeBron and Anthony Davis, but I think he can definitely take a step up as a player in terms of his development. He's still young enough to do that. I just struggle with this Lakers team, just where is their route to take the leap? I just don't know if I see one.
Yeah. Well, we'll start with some positives, and I think, they had the 5th most wins in the NBA after February 1st. They had an offensive rating in that time period that ranked 3rd. Both LeBron James and Anthony Davis played at an all-NBA level, and both played more than 70 games. But then again, are you going to get that again next year? I bet probably more likely not than yeah, but we'll see. They did go 21-10, in the last 31 games. They played fewer lineups than last year. It was basically D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves, James, Hachimura, and Davis. That lineup had a net rating of plus 6.3 points per 100 possessions. They were good when they were on the floor. Yet all of those positives are kind of overshadowed by the fact that they got beat by the Denver Nuggets for the 2nd straight year. And where they go from here kind of depends on the decision-making of Rob Pelinka, their GM. He's got basically 2 options. The first of which is the path of continuity. He can run back the same roster that finished 21-10 after the All-Star break. They've got 12 players under contract. James, Russell, Jackson Hayes, Cam Reddish, all of which hold player options for next year. But, that will come at a cost considering the Lakers would exceed the luxury tax and the first apron if the same roster does return. So they can go that route and hope that they get the same level of performance from LeBron and Anthony Davis and things come together, because this roster was 27-32, before they turned it around in late February. Or the more aggressive option, I think, for them is to take more of an aggressive approach, more likely so in the trade market, because they will go from having 1 tradable first to 3 tradable firsts on draft night. They'll go from having just a 2029 to 3 tradable first, 2024, 2025, and 2029. 2024 or 2025, 2029, and 2030. Can't talk. 2031. Starting the night of the draft. And so I think the only way they can really improve this roster and take that next leap is to have an all-star become available. And they have trade swap rights in 2026, 2028, 2029, 2030, and 2031. It's just it's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
The Lakers really only have 4 what I would consider large enough tradable contracts outside of James and Davis, and those would be Austin Reeves, Gabe Vincent, Roy Hachimura, and Jared Vanderbilt. So we'll see where they go. The difficulty is, how do they find another star with this new collective bargaining agreement that kind of restricts your flexibility and how already high spending teams can add to their rosters. Let's flip this conversation to the East, where the Philadelphia 76ers lost to the New York Knicks. Again, your thoughts on the Sixers?
Well, the Sixers have in some senses, a brighter outlook than some of these other teams we've talked about. But at the same time, you can look at it from a negative light as well and be like, where it just depends on where you are in Embiid, really. Now, they have cap space. They have some flexibility for trades. Now that Tobias Harris is coming off the books, I think Oubre was on a 1 year as well. I think some of these guys they got in the James Harden trade were on 1 years also. So they have a lot of open space available. Now it just depends on, what you do with it. Now I just think, is the answer going out and getting a third star? To me, it has to be the absolute perfect fit if you're going to do that. I don't know if I like the idea of a DeMar DeRozan stepping into this team. I struggle to see that working. But there's so many questions to that, just because there's no way to predict what's going on inside of Daryl Morey's head. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Priority number one is sign Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah, of course.
Who's waited over a year pretty much to sign a new contract. So that won't be the hard part. If they have any working brains in that front office, that will be done fairly quickly. The creativity part will come with how the 76ers decide to assemble the rest of the roster with an okay, free agent class. You think about LeBron James and Paul George, who could become free agents, but they both have player options. And then it's basically OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam. There are some others you can throw in there, DeMar DeRozan. But then it takes a dip from there. So
Anunoby, maybe.
Yeah, I mentioned him.
Yeah.
The name everyone's going to throw out there is Paul George, if he becomes available. But then again, signing Paul George to a max contract,
that's scary.
Starting at $49 million is scary, and it would require them to basically renounce all of their other free agents, and build out the roster with the remaining cap space that they have left over, along with the mid-level exception, and veteran minimum contracts. So, they could look to retain a lot of their roster, Lowry, Batum, DeAnthony Melton, Kelly Oubre, and then split up the remaining $60 million that they'll have and kind of split it up to what I would call kind of like the tier 2 of free agent market. Maybe you throw some money at DeMar DeRozan, Miles Bridges, Malik Monk, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I'm just throwing out names. You could kind of assemble a roster that way. Or you could go after a trade, an all-star trade, because they do have the cap space and the ability to use their own free agents in a sign-and-trade kind of deal, along with 5 tradable first-round picks and multiple pick swaps that they have available at their disposal. So there are different routes they can take. We'll see which one Daryl Morey chooses. Real fast, let's address the Milwaukee Bucks.
Ooh, I wanted to do the Suns. Would you want to maybe save the Bucks for a different day?
Sure. Or if you have time still after the Suns, we can do it.
All right. Yeah. All right.
No.
Yeah. Let's. Yeah. We can maybe do them both fast. So the Suns, I think the reason I, called them out and wanted to do them for this segment. Pause. But the thing is, there's just a lot that came out in their exit interviews that I thought was very interesting. For one, it's not every day you see a owner go down to the podium in the exit interviews. And not only that, he did drop some bombs. Like I'm paraphrasing here, but he said 26 other teams would love to be in our position. And I just struggle to believe that. They're hamstrung, to put it simply. Like, there's no team that's going to trade for Bradley Beal unless you're pairing him up with all the picks you got and you don't have any. And then Kevin Durant, I don't know what you get for him at this point. And then you're not trading Devin Booker. So it's just, you look at running this team back, and if you re-sign Grayson Allen, you're looking at, if you sign him for say $20 million, it's almost like you sign him for $50 million with the amount you're paying in luxury tax. So hamstrung doesn't even begin to describe the cap situation. Not to mention, on top of all that, they're a mediocre team. Like, all three of them on the floor, they were a top 10 offense, but they weren't a dominant offense, which is what they needed to be with the, resources that are input into those three players. So I struggled to see it. I think, there are ways you can add a point guard. There are guys out there you can go get, maybe a Tyus Jones through a trade, possibly. He's probably looking to get out of Washington. But even then, does that move the needle? I don't know.
Nope, doesn't. Yeah, they're restricted because they have $209 million in salary on the books heading into the offseason. Biggest payroll of any NBA team.
50 to 3 players.
Huh?
150 to 3 players.
Yeah, that too. The Grayson Allen extension has increased their projected luxury tax penalty to $116 million. They're also almost $17 million over the second apron. Now, they do have Eric Gordon, Josh Okogie, Drew Eubanks all have until June 29th to opt into their contracts for next year. And they have veteran minimum deals that they have available to them to use in free agency to replace any of those players if those players do leave. But I think the priorities for the Suns in this offseason, in my opinion, as you're really hamstrung in what you can do otherwise, is they need to basically take what teams like Golden State, Miami, and Denver did last year, and they need to follow basically that blueprint, in my opinion. They need to focus on the draft. I know it's not the deepest draft in the world, but they need to add experienced college players who can contribute right away next season. You talk about a Brandon Pojemski, who contributed for the Warriors this past year. Jaime Jaquez, coming out of UCLA, who contributed for the Heat. Julian Strother. Names like that. Like, focus on adding some experienced college players. They are allowed to trade their first-round picks starting the night of the draft, so we'll see what they do with that. But I'd focus on the draft. You need to focus on Royce O'Neal. They have his bird rights to go ahead and re-sign him. They can bring him back on like a $10 million deal. but at the same time, that would cost them more in luxury tax penalties. They're just in a really tough spot. You basically you're in the same spot you were last year. You only really have those veteran minimum contracts to work with, and so I don't really know what you do. What the owner said blows my mind. I don't know why he said that or what. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's an arrogance
Uh-huh.
that's there. Like there's an arrogance about that ownership group that just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
And I don't even just say that as a Mavs fan because obviously we know the history between my fan base and their fan base, but just even beyond that though. But when you said experienced college player, the name that popped in my head right away was Kevin McCullough Jr.
Yeah.
in Kansas. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, it would. We'll see what happens. They're a second apron team. You mentioned the $150 million owed to Booker, Beal, and Durant. The salary of those three players alone is more than 14 teams' total payroll going into next year. So that says it all. They're very restricted in what they can do and their flexibility. They've all but exhausted their options and how they can change the roster to make things matter. And to really move the needle going into next year, they need a starting point guard who can organize their offense. They need some high-level rotation players, and they need more defensive versatility. And that's a lot to go out and get with the limited flexibility that they have. So that's Phoenix. I'm sure we'll talk about them a lot more. We have a couple minutes. We can address Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on the Bucks?
Well, I think, there's a few routes you can go. So you can, kind of shift the, I guess, style of defense you play with the deep drop coverage with Brook Lopez by potentially moving off of Brook Lopez and going to playing Giannis at the center a bit more. But the interesting thing to me is that hasn't really been experimented with, and it doesn't really seem like Giannis likes playing the center position, from what I can tell. Because I feel like that would have been tried by now at one point or another. But the key here is like the potential of the Dame Giannis pick and roll is still there. The 2-man game that they can develop, it never really clicked this year. That whether that be, obviously Dame was very vocal about some of the things off court that he was dealing with mentally. And a few other factors could be in play as well with that. But there's still, time to get that right. And I think with that, I still have belief that this team can figure it out. But the clock is ticking. I think more than anything else, this team just needs like youth. Marjon Beauchamp was a guy that they drafted a couple years ago and was just non-existent this playoffs, didn't get any minutes. I just think they need some type of youthful legs in the lineup because they just look old and slow out there. And I think against a team like Indiana, it was like a polar opposite. And then I struggle to see a scenario where they're able to overcome that unless they can just, like, even if it's just guys off the bench who are young and can give you that energy and athleticism. I think that's very, very much needed.
Yeah, I think there are a couple options here. Number one, they could lose Malik Beasley, they could lose Jay Crowder, they could lose Patrick Beverly, all to free agency because they are over the apron and they're very limited in what they can offer. So how they would replace those players would be interesting. So the number one option is you go out and you sign some 1-year veteran minimum contracts to kind of replace those guys. But my kind of preferred route with Milwaukee would be making a concerted effort to kind of develop some of their younger role players.
Yes.
I think that's the route they need to go. Whether it be Marshawn Beauchamp, like you talked about, Andre Jackson Jr., or the guys that they draft in this upcoming draft, develop those guys into 15 to 20 minute role players. They can give you more energy, the lateral quickness, and some of the athleticism. You can inject some more youth into this team. It would, I think, benefit Damon Giannis. So I think that's the route you need to take if you're Milwaukee. We'll see what they do. Is there anything else that we need to address before we get out of here?
Well, I think the Bucks at least have, some hope. Like, I think Damon Giannis, it wasn't really unleashed this year. So if in theory, you run back with Doc Rivers, maybe you bring back Malik Beasley and maybe move him to the bench, which is where I think he would be best utilized at this point in his career.
Yeah.
And then you add a starting shooting guard who's a defending wing type of player, then I think you'll be in a much better spot. But yet again, there's a big gap between them and Boston right now.
Yeah, I agree. Let me think about anything else we need to talk about here. I think we pretty much addressed it all.
Huh.
So we'll definitely have more NBA content throughout the next couple of weeks as we continue to put a full court press on our NBA playoff coverage here in 2024. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that Fallout segment. We'll do it again after the second round for the teams that are eliminated, and then we'll kind of carry over these conversations to the offseason once that hits. In terms of this week, guys, if you're enjoying our content, we've got an episode tomorrow night. We're going to have an episode Wednesday night, and then we might have an episode between Wednesday and Sunday, but next Sunday, 1 week from tonight, we'll be doing a NBA playoff live stream, or at least we're planning to, for Game 4 of the Nuggets Timberwolves series. So that's what our schedule looks like for this week as of right now. There could be a NFL-centric draft episode on Friday or Saturday in between the Wednesday and Sunday episodes, but we'll probably more so be working on backloading some content for next week when Emmy's going to be busy for a stretch of like 3 days. But early next week, regardless, before that happens, we'll have our PGA Championship episode probably on Monday. So with all that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. And we'll see you tomorrow night. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed the NBA playoffs, and just like the Orlando Magic, the Philadelphia 76ers, and all the other teams that lost, we are gone. Peace out.